My name is Julie Abo, and I'd like to thank the Japanese-American Memorial Pilgrimages for this opportunity today to reflect upon an event that happened 7 years ago, the unveiling of the Empty Chair Memorial in Juneau, Alaska. So few people today know of the two people of Japanese descent who were removed from Alaska after Executive Order 9066 during World War II. And today's program recognizes that it was 7 years ago that the Empty Chair Bronze Memorial, crafted by artist Peter Wakelam, was unveiled in Juneau, Alaska, just steps from where the original chair was placed in May 1942, when the seniors at Juneau High School left an empty chair during their graduation ceremony to underscore the absence of their Japanese-American valedictorian, John Tanaka. The blog reads, by extension, this empty chair honors all the Japanese uprooted from their homes and communities. The Empty Chair Memorial represents the void the people of Juneau felt for their friends and neighbors impacted by this injustice. The 50 names of those incarcerated are etched on the bronze floor. And you can see behind me in the picture, the memorial itself that's there in Juneau, Alaska. I'd like to acknowledge the Juneau community members responsible for leading the community response for the Empty Chair Memorial created by Peter Wakelam, Margie Shackelford, Marie Darlin, who along with others were classmates of the incarcerated, and Roger Grummett, a Juneau businessman. So the Empty Chair story is recorded as part of Alaskan history with Karleen Grummett's book, Quiet Defiance, Alaska's Empty Chair Story, and Greg Cheney's documentary, The Empty Chair. The memorial itself was funded by donations from the wonderful community to the Juneau Community Foundation and the National Park Service Confinement Site Grant. So I'd also like to thank Greg Cheney for allowing us now to show the trailer of his film, The Empty Chair, which encapsulates the story through the oral histories of the people who lived this history. So I'll play that for you right now.
We all have our beginnings in this community in Juneau.
My dad believed in the American way. The word discrimination, I didn't even know what that meant.
Number 7, 1941. A date which will live in infamy.
They were taken away and put in prisons away from Alaska, and they had done nothing.
My dad was taken.
Hatred against Japan was running very high.
Because of the war, they were assumed to not be loyal to the United States.
There were no Japanese Americans left in Juneau at that time.
A lot of the school kids here had been together a long time. At our actual commencements that year, there was an empty chair on the platform.
It was a moment when this community came together in an act of quiet disobedience for the injustice of the internment.
Well, we're so thankful to Greg Cheney for that wonderful film. And if you get a chance, it's available for sale at the Japanese-American National Museum. As descendants of community members who were forcibly removed from Juneau, Alaska, and incarcerated during World War II, what does the empty chair mean to you? How has the creation of a monument affected you? So I'll go first, and each person will share with us their response to these questions. Okay, so my name's Julie Abo, and I grew up in Bremerton, Washington, and in the Pacific Northwest. And I'll just say that growing up, I always knew parts about this history because my mother always talked about it, Mary Tanaka Abo. And she wanted us to really know about it, and that the incarceration itself, was a wrong thing. And she also wanted my brother and I think, to be proud of being Japanese American. And she always made sure we had a strong bond with our grandma and grandfather, Abo. I didn't get to know my Tanaka grandparents because they passed away when I was 2, and before that. But anyway, I just wanted to give that little bit of background. So when I heard about the Empty Chair Project, because Margie Alstead Shackelford is my mother's dear childhood friend, and she started talking about it, I was just so moved by this, that she wanted to do something to commemorate this history and, make people aware of it in the Juneau community. And then also the subsequent community response was really amazing, incredible. And so this work that they did over 2 years was just a testament itself to, the Juneau community and what they thought about this history. So if we fast forward to actually what the empty chair means to me, I think that what happened in 2014 is they had an incredible unveiling of the monument, and they brought our families, the remaining survivors, who their names are on the monument, and we had this incredible ceremony. And they also had a film opening of Greg Chaney's film, The Empty Chair. And I think it was at the screening of the film in Juneau, Alaska. We were all there. My whole nuclear family was there, my brother and my mom and dad, and then my own family and my daughters were there. My cousins, Eddie Tanaka, who's on this call, was there with his family and his mother, who's my aunt, etc. So we were all there, extended family, and people started coming into the theater like drips of water. And then it was like this huge rush, and the whole theater was packed. And, I think at that moment, it really hit me that, this history that our family had told over the years was not just our family story. It was a part of American history. And it was a pretty incredible feeling and moment. I don't really quite know how to describe it, but it was kind of an awakening for me to just really experience that, not just think about it rationally, because I think I thought it rationally, but just really feel that because of the people who were there, and talking about it and asking questions. So that's the first thing, I think, the realization that this family history is American history. The other thing for me, I think, was that it also symbolizes that relationships can create empathy, because Margie Shackelford, who was the driving force behind the project, was childhood friends with my mother. And that's what was driving this need to find some way to express what had happened and find some kind of reconciliation. And I felt like, and also going back to that scene in the theater, it was this outpouring of empathy that came with the erecting and creation of this monument, the empty chair. I guess the final thing for me is that it also is sort of a beginning, especially in this day of social reckoning rather. What do monuments mean? And I realized that, and working with people that I've been talking to since that time, that there are so many other stories that we haven't heard. And Empty Chair is opening a door to what are the other, or asking that question, what are the other stories that we haven't heard that we need to know? And so I think those are the things that the empty chair means to me. And I'll just briefly comment on the impact or the effect the empty chair has had. The year after that, we went to the Minidoka pilgrimage, and Showa was also there at that pilgrimage in 2015. And they did a presentation at the pilgrimage on the empty chair. And I think it was that whole pilgrimage and being there with family again really made me feel like I need to do something. And I didn't really know what it was at the time. but I felt like, I need to be doing something more with this history, with this, what's happened. And so I changed the trajectory of my life, really, from that pilgrimage. I started thinking, and when we moved to Washington, D.C. 5 years ago, an opportunity came to volunteer with the Smithsonian Museum with Noriko Sanifuji with the Righting a Wrong exhibit. And it was really incredible to be talking to strangers and the public about this story, and just having these one-on-one conversations with anybody who walked in the door, which was a huge education for me. And anyway, going back, and then I also felt that, this is really what it's all about. It's about learning this history and learning its lessons, but also, looking out for what are the other stories that are out there? What are the stories that need to be heard? Because it's through these stories and these relationships and friendships that we're going to build empathy, and hopefully we can have, less hate out there, and just more love. So for me, I'll just have to close there. I'm just so thankful for the experience, and for all those of you who are here today. And I'll finish right there. And
hi, my name's Eddie Tanaka. I'm in Spokane, Washington. Well, I'm the son of John Tanaka, who the empty chair, it was supposed to be his chair that he was sitting in. But the thing that Julie talked about that kind of struck a chord with me is just how many stories are out there. A lot of them are unheard because a lot of the Iseis and Niseis, they didn't talk about it. My dad, he never talked about it. He never told me about missing his graduation or the time that he spent interned. And actually, the first time I heard about that was when Julie's mom, my Auntie Mary and Auntie Alice were working on the empty chair. So that was the first time I heard about that story. So, I actually have a personal connection because it was the chair that he was supposed to be sitting in, but, it symbolizes so much more to me. All the 120,000 people that were interned, their families split up, the businesses lost, like my grandpa's business. And, but, the other lesson I learned was was what Juneau did. They could have been just like all the other towns that didn't do anything, but they stood up for the Japanese. They helped my grandfather when he returned from the war. They extended him credit, and the people went to his restaurant, supported it, where a lot of other towns, they didn't do that. They were mean to the Japanese. They didn't help them at all, most of them. So to me, I guess the empty chair, it showed how wrong our country was to incarcerate the Japanese, but it also showed me how right Juneau was to support the Japanese. So to me, it means injustice and get involved. Even though it was over 70 years ago, the message is still so contemporary and valid today. We're surrounded by injustices, Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, LGBTQ, Muslim bans, Asian hate crimes, list goes on and on. But so I guess it's affected me by making me feel compelled to do as the people of Juneau did and get involved. To me, it's almost like a torch has been passed to my generation. We have to make sure that the lessons from the empty chair, that they don't get lost and disappear. So as descendants, I think, we have to be a voice like the empty chair to try to keep history from repeating itself. And we just need to keep fighting for liberty and justice for all people. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Right. I was born in Alaska and I live in Bellingham now. And just what Eddie was saying about how community changes, like how the community can impact, that really was one of the hugest things about the empty chair that I really felt, was that the community and the community's actions changed how people can experience internment. And Juneau and Petersburg and other small towns in Alaska, the lens through which my father experienced it, the community with which he came back to, the community that he was from, really has impacted how he remembers the experience. And it really struck me how much a community can impact an experience like that, and how much your participation in a community can lessen the trauma that somebody is feeling when they're going through that type of experience. And I can't speak to it personally, but from what I have heard, from what he has told me, the reception from the community and how they were received and how their things were taken care of, and they didn't feel that sort of isolation that other communities, perhaps in Washington and Oregon and California, felt. So Southeast Alaska seems to have been a little bit different. So that's really the empty chair, as much as it is a memorial to interned Japanese. It really felt to me like it was a statement of community and what community can do. And how it has affected my life is that story has allowed my father to open up about his time. He was quite young, but sharing that story, the story that is more personal, the story that is more similar to his own, the story of a community coming together, has allowed him to open up in terms of sharing that experience and what he went through. So really, I think that's it.
Hello, everyone. My name's Shoal. I'm fourth generation. So my grandfather grew up in Juneau, and my great grandfather immigrated from Fukuoka and is part of the Tanaka family. I think, attending the memorial ceremony, I'm not huge on memorials, to be honest. What's really important for me, I think, was the relationships that were built through, I hadn't had a chance to visit Juneau before, and I really believe that, our memory is stored in land and places. And so to return to the land activated a lot of my sort of ancestral memory and understanding how to work with this story, and how to, think about my grandfather's experience. And so, yeah, those relationships have grown into things, that have really allowed me to maintain an ongoing conversation with the folks in Juneau and in Southeast. I think one thing that comes to mind is what are my responsibilities, like specifically to people from Makwan and Tlingit people, upon whose land all this has taken place. And I think in general, the like real sort of mechanisms of the empty chair was a collaboration between Japanese settlers and the white community. And so I wonder what other sort of responsibilities do we have. I also think about I think about the story and the empty chair and what it can symbolize. I think that there's something that fits sort of in the American narrative about a valedictorian and sort of like a really successful male, who was everything an American should be except for race. And I think a lot about the people who have had different experiences. I think there were beautiful connections and things that happened in Juneau and Southeast. There's also a lot of really difficult stories and a lot of stories that I still don't really know how to hold, publicly or in a way that is with good intention. But I think that's, I've been reading by a book by a scholar, Juliana Hu-Pegues, and she talks about Shoki Kayamori, who's was a bachelor who lived in Yakutat, and he had close connections with the community there, and he was suspected of being a spy, and so he killed himself before they could take him away. I think partially because he was a photographer, and so he had documented a lot of the coastline, and he had really close connections with the Tlingit community in Yakutat. And so, I think like a lot of the sort of energy around creating the empty chair has put sort of the story of being valedictorian and successful at the center. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that there's a lot of other, I don't know, I think for me, like, I don't really believe so much in permanence. I think things sort of come and they disappear, and I wait for them and spirits and whatever. And so I think that, I just wonder how we can, what other sort of forms of commemoration or memory or building together that allow for, the complexity of stories that have existed and still exist in relation to this incarceration, and how it's affected mixed race families. And I think, my family, we had a business, a city cafe, we were successful in that sense. And so there's this way that my family story can fit in sort of this normative American model of how families are supposed to look. And so, I wonder about all the people who don't fit in that model and how we work with their memories and how we, it's difficult, but still, like I said, the relationships and the sort of space that has been created with this work is invaluable, and listening to the elders. And, I don't think that this is, it's a sort of sign of how much the weight history has, and it's always going to be beautiful and difficult and heartbreaking. And so that's, I think, my reflections and how I hold the memorial, after 7 years. I guess I can't believe it's 7 years ago. It feels like a couple lifetimes. So
yeah. So Sho, I hear you when you're talking about like kind of the successful model of a family. My family had the Juneau Laundry up there too. And so there's always kind of like, when talking about the Japanese Americans who were up there at the time, it's like there was the Tanakas and there was the Fukuyamas. And then there's always this sort of like, and then there was a bunch of other people too, who I think my family often called them laborers, but there was just like this kind of blob of like, I guess maybe just like single people. So they're not necessarily included in this list. But yeah, I've always found that interesting too, the way they're kind of in a different category for who knows what reason. That's worth thinking about. But so when I think of the empty chair, mostly what I think about is the actual week that we were all there back in 2014, and how it kind of created a space for me to visit Juneau with my Ji-chan. It's the only time I've been to Juneau, certainly the only time I've been with him. So if it wasn't for the empty chair, like I never would have gone with him to kind of, walk the streets where he grew up, and sharing that experience and having him, point out different buildings where he lived and where he worked, was just a really meaningful experience that I wouldn't have had if it wasn't for the empty chair. So I'm just really grateful for the empty chair for providing that for us. And then also I think about, so for me, I've always had a really strong connection to the city that I live in. And so for me, that's always been Seattle. Most of my life has been Seattle. And for our family too, it's been kind of like a grounding place. Seattle is where we're all sort of feels like home to us. I have a cousin who lives in California, and his parents moved to California before he was born. But when people ask him where he's from, he still says Seattle. And he says that's because that's where my Bachan and Ji-chan have always lived. And so just having that like family connection to Seattle gives us a place to feel rooted. And so with Empty Chair, it's like knowing that Juneau was that place for them, and it could have and maybe should have been that for our family going forward. But the internment kind of like severed that connection to Juneau. And so the empty chair between the actual week, having those memories formed in 2014, and just knowing that the memorial's there now kind of reestablishes that connection to Juneau, and kind of gives us another place where we can feel a little bit of connection to home, in a place that really should have been, you know, a connection point for our family. Yeah, I guess those are kind of the ways I think of how the empty chair has impacted me.
Well, two things that Sho said that struck a chord with me, and when you said that that places hold memories, and I really felt that too. Even though, you know, I've been to Juneau a few times, but I just couldn't stop thinking when we were there, like, you know, hey, this is where they were living, and growing up there, and yes, also tied to, you know, the people who were there before, and it kind of, I kind of had this opening up of, you know, what that there's that one moment in time, or the time that we talk about with the empty chair, World War II, but then there's all the other moments that happened before that, and this is just one small slice of that. So yeah, I've been thinking about that too, and I've been really drawn to, you've been done a lot of work in Alaska, so I don't know if you would mind talking a little bit about that.
Well, I was just gonna say that the Tlingit stories, like that resonated with me, is the communities were so intertwined. So trying to untangle those two communities is incredible. It would be incredibly complex and terribly interesting. And I think that there is, my grandmother was Tlingit and my grandfather was Japanese, and she went to internment camp with him. And that's sort of how you reconcile those two ethnicities, those two communities, and how they came together, and then how they were torn apart by the whole. So it just spoke to me, I suppose, is finding those stories. A lot of them are lost, but eventually finding them.
I'll just say, Julie, you were talking about that moment in the theater, seeing how many people came, and I remember having that exact same feeling, kind of going there and not knowing what to expect from this whole thing. And then just seeing the way like the whole city turned out. And I think the mayor came to the dedication. And I think that was probably really meaningful for the survivors who were there too, just to be able to see, like, you know, kind of not knowing how their experience was just to leave Juneau. It sounds like your family may have gone back a little bit, but I know my family basically never went back to Juneau after all that. And so to see that they were welcomed back, I think meant a lot to them. And it really struck me too, just the theater was kind of the first moment of seeing, like, wow, these people are really showing up for this. So
Yeah, I kind of wish I'd taken the time to really converse with people more, and, you know, the community members. I think I tended to just talk to people that I knew, or had, you know, from other visits and things. It'd be really interesting to go back. How about you, Eddie? Anything that came to mind that struck you?
Yeah, I mean, when you talked about all the support from the community, it always reminded me, because I did go back to Juneau when I was like 7 years old, and you know, that was way before the empty chair and all that. But even back then, you know, that community was still so supportive. And my dad, you know, he couldn't walk a block without seeing somebody and talking and hugging them. And you know, I just always felt that there was something special about Juneau. And I think, you know, especially with all the problems we have in our society today, we can learn a lot, and hopefully we can be more like them. And because there are a lot of but like Sho was saying, there are a lot of stories that are different also. So I think we need to try to find these stories and get them before, because these people are all disappearing. I think it's up to our generation and the ones to follow to really keep this going, so it'll not only help the Japanese but the whole society as our whole society, because it's so interlinked with what's all these other discrimination things that are going on today.
Yeah, I feel like you too, Eddie. I feel that there's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
Maybe the five of us could do something. I don't know what. But
just to give a little context, I think that the mass incarceration of Japanese people has pretty much an unchallenged logic of you're Japanese, so we're incarcerating you. And I think that pretty much in the lower 48, people were generally at that time in what we might see as non-mixed marriages, which is a complicated thing because Japanese are not a pure race either, but that's for ease of thinking, that's sort of how it was perceived, is that it was a Japanese who married a Japanese. And so Okinawan stories would challenge that and other things, but except for a few outlying random people who had married people of other races or in other relationships, that was the community formation. And so in Southeast Alaska, it was a lot of men who came as bachelors or to do seasonal work that ended up staying there and forming relationships with Native women. And so you have a sort of this problem that the government officials have used in some ways last names and visuals to decide who and how to incarcerate people. But in a wartime fury, you can't exactly decide who's Japanese and who's Tlingit very quickly when you have all these mixed families. And so that in general, I think the model was that mixed race children who were over, I think it's 16 or something, were taken to the camps, and then the women could choose whether they went with their husbands or not. But there's of course stories of Native women going to camp, and there's stories of Japanese men staying in communities and passing and not being detected by the authorities. And so you have this problem sort of in the actual incarceration process, but then in the commemoration of it, we have this understanding that mixed race is this sort of new fancy thing where all our kids are marrying people of other races and it's some happy family. And the problem is that races have always been mixing. Races are just sort of these ideas of how we view people at the time, and it's constantly shifting. And so because you have the intersecting violence of anti-Japanese specific wartime racism, but then also anti-Native sentiment, both from Japanese communities and from white communities, and the ongoing sort of mechanisms of colonization that are dispossessing people from land, you have a very specific, it's the sort of ways that we form community as a whole as Japanese Americans don't allow for these stories to exist with the intention and depth that they deserve. And so in some ways I think there's an act of reparation on our part of thinking through why and how certain stories, it's about power, it's about access, how do we view race and these sort of things. And so I think in that way, Alaska is a geographic outlier compared to the center of, California or Seattle, where the stories of incarceration normally come from, but it also challenges the very sort of model of oral history and community building that we've created. And so I think that's work that is still, to be done, and still to figure out how to start to sit with those wounds for the depths that they sort of hold, right? So
I was just going to say to what you were saying about sort of just wanting to, that that empty chair experience, it inspired something in you. We had very few, some recorded history from my grandmother, but both my grandparents, and my father to a certain extent sort of went by the model minority, the good Americans. It seemed like they didn't want to talk about it, and they didn't want to talk about it. And a lot of that, I think, is because the separation of America from Americans, from their experience of community, compared to the experience of so many others. They really did experience a more open, inviting community upon their return than a lot of other people did. And I think my grandmother's experience of it, though, for me, is now only accessible through my father. And that story of community is how I get to him. That is that open window, is how I can get through that desire not to be too upset about it. And that's how that's my way to grasp at it. So that's really how it's affected my life, is it's really allowed him to open up under the umbrella of the story of a community that was supportive. And that is a narrative with which he is comfortable, and he feels kinship. And so that's how I reach him, and that's how I get more stories. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think, Sho, do you want to respond? I think what you two just said is related.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this work, if I think the white man sort of tried to colonize time out of us, but if we really trust that, our ancestors are with us, that as we revisit the history each time, we're able to do work on their behalf, and they're able to do work on our behalf that wasn't able to be done. As time changes, we're able to access things that perhaps they didn't have, the resources or the emotional privilege to deal with. And so I think that our telling of the story, it's not a static, I think sort of colonial history is a static sort of closed box, but it really is sort of an ongoing relationship building. And that's part of why I think that for the outside community, the Tanaka family story has come to stand in for the Alaska story. And I think that I would, as a descendant of that family, would very much reject that model, because it's a lot to do with, I think, our privilege and things. And that's not to say that's not an important story, but that there are many other stories, and those things are all all there. And I think because Alaska has such little in the whole narrative, it's a very small thing. And so this this memorial and the family that is attached to it, and I think the Fukuyamas to an extent as well become sort of what people know. And I just want to say that that's really because of the power of history, not because this is necessarily the representative story or the one that is so
No,
but the empty chair, the good thing about an empty chair is you fill it, I guess, with what you want. And so that's there's a lot there.
Yes, and it's just a story. It's one of the stories. I think that's kind of how I feel now. And there are so many more. And it's not just about stories, right? We are having a youth panel. So I hope people can listen in on that to hear about the histories there. And I hope we can have another conversation, the five of us, sometime. And really, I would love to work on a project with you moving forward of, I'm not sure what it is right now, but, to do something, Eddie, like you said. And thank you so much. Does anybody want to say a final thought? Everybody can just say one final thought.
It was great. This whole talk and everything was great. I learned a lot, and it does open up a lot more curiosity and incentive to do more. Hope.
All right, so my final thought is that I think just this conversation has kind of given me even more enthusiasm or an itch for finding out more. So now I have a little bit more curiosity and more questions. So show.
I feel like I said a lot. Yeah, I think just I would reiterate that sort of idea that history is not something that's dead, is something that we sort of like ancestors always will. I mean, I think in a sort of like, you know, American model minority colonized context, there's always this sort of like, I don't know enough, whatever, but there always is a next step, I think. And so, you know, with our ancestors and sort of doing this work, there always is a next step. And so it's sometimes finding the courage and the resources within ourselves to make that step. But it's not an easy way, but it's also, I think, helps to like some of that really hopelessness that sort of can infiltrate in depression in a colonized mindset is helpful. So yeah. So David.
So I just want to say thanks everybody for the panel. So I think a lot of the stuff you said was really interesting. Just thinking about, like you were saying, that a lot of the focus of the whole memorial really was on the Tanakas and the Fukuyamas. So now I'm just kind of curious, you know, who were all these other people, Japanese Americans that were there, that were always kind of lumped on the side as the other category. So if there is more work on this, that might be a area to move into. So yeah, now we're gonna play, this is a video that I shot back in 2014 around the memorial. This wasn't necessarily intended to be like a film back then, so there's not a lot of backstory or too much thought put into it. It was just kind of like recording the experience as a keepsake for the family.
Lots of documentaries about the internment, the injustice of it, But this is a Juneau story, and I actually think it's an American story.
You know, my dad and mom, like all Japanese first generation immigrants, they worked their head off in Juneau. You know, my dad and mother were really model citizens, and they were living American life until December 7th, 1941. And you've all heard about that on the video or with this presentation. I'll pass it over. I could go on, but I'll stop.
It gets pretty slick in the wintertime, let me tell you. You know, there's a reason why everybody has all these four-wheel drive cars now, you know? And it's called hills like this, yeah. So Gold Street is pretty steep. And you probably remember that there used to be a Catholic school here.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Sisters of St. Anne left Juneau in the mid-1970s. And when they did, they went ahead and closed the school, and it stayed to be, it was a parish hall for the church for a long time, but eventually it had a lot of problems. What they did was they tore it down and built a whole new parish hall here, but the cathedral's still there, and St. Nicholas
I didn't have a chair to work with. So. Alaska laundry, and I said, God, they're really colorful, aren't they?
I always imagine myself standing here on a beautiful sunny day arranging my lovely red jacket with dry hair. This isn't quite, but then I thought, okay, it's Juneau, you know. I remember when I lived in Juneau, we did everything in the rain and the snow and the blizzard, and we didn't stop for anything, right? That's what it meant to be Alaskan. The original chair was placed as a silent protest of the forcible removal and incarceration of Juneau's Japanese community at the class of 1942's graduation. Our fervent hope is that this chair will remind future generations that although sometimes we are powerless to prevent injustice, in the words of Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, there should never be a time when we fail to protest it. So here it will sit, a powerful and somber symbol of a heartwarming yet poignant Juneau story.
I think that looking back on the graduation that day and talking with some of my classmates and Walter's classmates afterwards, that empty chair signified a lot. It meant that we had lost a lot of our community. And the war actually came home to all of us maybe in looking at that empty chair. It is so nice to have so many of these families now come back again and for us to get the chance to meet them. And it's so nice to know that Walter could come because we kept hearing all this. He might or he might not, but his family got together and they made the decision for him, and so that was great.
You know, John really deserved this honor. I didn't know John very well in Juneau. Alice said it's because they lived in the south end and I lived in the north end of Franklin Street. But you know, my dad would come around, about every so many months and show me the paper, and it says, look, John made the honor roll again. It sounded like, where's your name? Well, I better quit, but I want to say, there's one thing I want to say is I'm glad I could see Marie again.
The Empty Chair, honoring Juneau's Japanese community unjustly incarcerated during World War II, 1941 to 1945. The artist, Peter Reichman, dedicated July 12, 2014. The Empty Chair Memorial represents the void the people of Juneau felt for their friends and neighbors impacted by this injustice. The names of those interned are etched on the bronze floor. A time may come when these names will be forgotten, but the symbol of the empty chair will remind future generations of the lessons learned from this compelling and poignant story.
Star Hill is just as steep as ever. I lived up here for a year, and I lived in this house here, and boy, I'll tell you, it was